In the world of power, there are men who command fear with a glance. Julian Thorne was such a man, the kind whose name was whispered in darkened rooms, whose enemies disappeared without trace. On the day he was to seal his criminal empire through marriage, Julian stood at the altar, cold and calculating as ever. 200 of the city's most dangerous people watched as his bride approached. The cathedral's stained glass cast blood-red light across marble floors. Perfect symbolism for a union built on ambition, not love. But fate had other plans. A small figure appeared from nowhere, a little girl in a faded blue dress, moving with purpose through a room of killers. Security missed her. Guests didn't notice her, until she reached the altar steps and looked up at the most feared man in the city with eyes that mirrored his own. What happened next shattered an empire. She whispered 3 words in his ear, 3 words that turned stone to flesh, 3 words that reminded a monster he was once a man, 3 words that would cost him everything he'd built and give him something he never knew he wanted. Before we go any further, if you're already hooked, hit that like button right now and make sure you're subscribed. Stories like this one don't come around often, and you do not want to miss what that little girl said. Let's go. All right, let's get back to the wedding. Julian Thorne stood motionless at the altar, the weight of his empire resting on shoulders that had never once bent under pressure. The cathedral, rented at an obscene cost and cleared of its regular clergy for the afternoon, towered around him, its vaulted ceilings and stained glass a mockery of the sacred. Nothing about this union was blessed. Sunlight filtered through colored glass, casting blood-red patterns across the marble floor. Appropriate, Julian thought, watching the play of crimson light. The Calabrese family seated to his right, his own organization to the left, 200 of the most dangerous people in the city, gathered under one roof and separated by a narrow aisle. Nervous? Asked Marco, his best man and lieutenant of 15 years. Julian didn't bother responding. Marco knew better. In 2 decades of building his organization from street corner to empire, Julian Thorne had executed men without blinking, ordered deaths over breakfast, negotiated territory over the bodies of rivals. He didn't feel nervous. He didn't feel much of anything anymore. His bride would arrive in precisely 7 minutes. Victoria Calabrese, 26, Oxford-educated, fluent in 4 languages, and heir to her father's considerable interests across the eastern seaboard. They had met exactly 3 times. The 3rd meeting had been to discuss prenuptial terms that read more like a corporate merger than a marriage, which was exactly what this was. The Calabrese organization controlled the ports. Julian controlled distribution networks. Together, they would create something untouchable, something immortal, something worth the charade of this ceremony. Julian adjusted his cufflinks, platinum, understated. His suit was bespoke, his shoes handmade in Milan. The exterior was perfect. It always was. The interior had gone cold years ago, precisely when he decided that weakness was a luxury he could not afford. Some men remembered the exact moment they fell in love. Julian remembered the exact moment he decided love was irrelevant. From the back of the cathedral, the quartet began playing. Not the wedding march. Victoria's father had insisted on something more refined. Pachelbel. Julian checked his watch. Right on time. He looked up to see the cathedral doors swing open, Victoria's silhouette backlit against the afternoon sun. She was beautiful, objectively speaking. Dark hair, olive skin, eyes that gave nothing away. In that, at least, they were compatible. 2 voids circling each other, creating a greater darkness. The guests rose. Julian's men watched him carefully, alert for the smallest sign of what they should feel about this alliance. His face gave them nothing. He had perfected the art of emotional vacancy long before it became his defining characteristic. As Victoria began her measured walk down the aisle, Julian calculated the new territories this marriage would secure. The expanded influence. The eliminated competition. Love had never entered his equations. Power was the only variable that mattered. This was the summit of everything he had built. The crowning achievement of a life dedicated to control. Julian Thorne had arrived. She arrived through a service entrance, a wraith-like figure slipping between the cathedral's ancient stone columns. The child was small for 7, if she was indeed 7, with a frame that suggested missed meals rather than genetics. Her dress was faded blue cotton, not dirty but worn at the edges, a garment that had seen too many washings and not enough replacements. No one noticed her at first. The security detail's attention had turned inward toward the procession, their backs to the perimeter they were meant to guard. Their mistake. Professional security's cardinal sin. The assumption that threats announce themselves. Mila Hart moved with the peculiar economy of children who have learned to make themselves invisible. Her steps were measured, deliberate. This was not a child wandering lost, but a missile locked on target. Her brown eyes, too large for her face, too old for her years, never wavered from the altar. From Julian. Halfway down the side aisle, she paused behind a column. The priest had begun speaking, his voice echoing through the cathedral. Victoria stood across from Julian, her veil a translucent curtain between her and the life she was entering. Mila waited, a predator choosing her moment. Patient. Calculating. Dominic Gallo, Julian's security chief, was the first to notice her. He had survived 20 years in Julian's service by cultivating a paranoia that bordered on the pathological. His eyes constantly swept the room, cataloging each face, each shadow. When the shadow moved, Dominic saw it. A child. Alone. In a fortress of killers. He started forward, but the girl was already moving again. With preternatural timing, she stepped from behind the column precisely as a photographer's flash went off, the momentary blindness providing the perfect cover. 3 more steps, and she was in the center aisle, behind the last row of guests. Dominic touched his earpiece, alerting the team. The child should never have made it this far. Someone would answer for this breach. Later, Mila walked forward, her steps silent against the marble floor. 200 of the most dangerous people in the city, and not one of them noticed the little girl walking toward the most feared man among them. It was absurdity bordering on divine intervention. 20 feet from the altar, Julian continued staring at his bride, his face impassive. Victoria's father watched with the calculated interest of a man completing a business transaction. The priest intoned about sacred unions. No one saw. 15 feet. Dominic was moving now, cutting across the side aisle, but the guests blocked his path. His gesture toward the other security personnel was sharp, urgent. Too late. 10 feet. A woman in the third row finally noticed, her small gasp catching in her throat. Then another. Heads began to turn. 5 feet. Julian heard the disturbance before he saw its cause. A ripple of murmurs, the slightest shift in the room's atmosphere. Something had changed. Something was wrong. She was at the altar steps now, this child who should not be here, this impossibility. The priest stopped mid-sentence. Victoria turned. And Julian Thorne, for the first time in years, felt something crack in his perfect composure as he looked down into eyes that carried an echo of something he had tried very hard to forget. Time suspended as the child stood at the altar steps. 2 security men moved toward her, but Julian raised his hand. A gesture so slight it was nearly imperceptible, yet one that froze every person in his employ. The cathedral held its collective breath. The girl ascended the first step, then the second. Her movements were mechanical, as though she were following instructions she had rehearsed until they became muscle memory. Julian noted the precision in her steps. Children moved with chaos. This one moved with purpose. "Sir," Dominic hissed from 3 feet away, hand inside his jacket. "We should remove her." Julian ignored him. Something in the child's face commanded his full attention, a familiarity he couldn't immediately place. The shape of her eyes, perhaps, or the particular angle of her chin. He had seen those features before, in a face he had tried very deliberately to forget. Victoria shifted beside him, her wedding dress rustling with expensive discomfort. "Julian," she whispered, "what is happening?" The girl reached the top step. 7 years old, standing before the most feared man in the city, surrounded by killers in formal wear. She should have been terrified. She wasn't. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice clear despite its softness. "Something only you should hear." Julian found himself bending down, an automatic response that surprised him. He never accommodated others. Others accommodated him. Yet here he was, the untouchable Julian Thorne, lowering himself to the level of a child who had materialized from nowhere. She cupped her small hand around her mouth and leaned toward his ear. Her breath was warm, carrying the faint scent of peppermint. "I'm Mila Hart," she whispered. "My mother was Elise Hart." The name landed like a physical blow. Elise. 8 years ago. A lifetime ago. "She told me to find you if I was ever in danger," the girl continued. She said, "Tell him you're his daughter." 3 words. "You're his daughter." Julian felt the cathedral tilt beneath his feet. Blood rushed in his ears, drowning out the confused murmurs of the guests. 8 years. The timing was right. And the eyes, he recognized them now. They were his own, staring back at him from a face that carried echoes of the only woman he had ever allowed himself to love. A woman who had disappeared. A woman he had been told was dead. A woman whose death, he now realized with sickening clarity, had been orchestrated by someone in this very room. She said 3 words that turned a crime lord into a father. If this is hitting you already, drop a comment below. What do you think Julian's first reaction was? We read every single one. Now stay with us. Now, here's where everything changed. Julian straightened to his full height, the girl's words still echoing in his mind. His face betrayed nothing, but inside, tectonic plates of identity were shifting. He looked at Victoria, her expression frozen between confusion and growing irritation. "This ceremony is over," he said, his voice pitched only for those at the altar. The priest blinked. "I beg your pardon, Mr. Thorne. The wedding," Julian clarified, louder now, "will not be proceeding." The words fell like stones into still water, rippling outward as they reached each row of guests. A murmur began, then swelled. Victoria's veil trembled with the short, sharp breaths of someone navigating sudden humiliation. "You cannot be serious," she hissed, her perfect composure finally cracking. "Over a child? Some street urchin?" Julian did not respond. His attention had already shifted back to Mila, who stood with the unnatural stillness of a child who had learned that movement invited danger. Salvatore Calabrese, Victoria's father, stepped forward. The old man's face had darkened to a dangerous crimson. "Thorne," he said, voice quivering with barely controlled rage, "you dishonor my daughter, my family, and an agreement 2 years in the making." "For what?" Julian placed his hand on Mila's shoulder. The gesture was awkward, unpracticed, yet unmistakably protective. "Family business," he said simply. Marco stepped closer, eyes darting between Julian and the girl. "Boss, what's happening? Who is she?" "Clear the cathedral," Julian ordered, ignoring the question. "Everyone out. Now." His security team moved immediately, herding the bewildered guests toward the exits. The Calabrese family remained rooted in place, their patriarch vibrating with fury. "This insult will not stand," Salvatore said, each word a promise of retribution. "The alliance is dead. So are all our arrangements." Julian nodded once. "As you wish." He guided Mila down the altar steps and through a side door that led to the cathedral's private offices. Behind them, chaos erupted. Victoria's anguished cry, Salvatore's shouted threats, the confused babble of 200 dangerous people trying to comprehend what they had just witnessed. In a small antechamber lined with ancient books, Julian closed the door and knelt before the girl. Up close, the resemblance was undeniable. His eyes, Elise's mouth, the quiet intensity that had drawn him to her mother. "How did you find me?" he asked. "Mom left instructions with Aunt Sarah. She said when Mom died, I should wait until I was 7, then find you on your wedding day." Mila's voice was steady, rehearsed. "She said it would be the only time when all your enemies would be in one place, watching you instead of me." Julian absorbed this. Elise had known his patterns, anticipated his moves, even from beyond the grave. Why now? What danger? Mila's eyes, his eyes, filled with tears that didn't fall. "They killed Aunt Sarah 3 days ago. They came looking for something Mom left with her. When they didn't find it, they said they'd come back for me." "What did they want?" "A key. And a name." The girl's composure finally wavered. "The name was yours." Julian's penthouse overlooked the city like a glass fortress. From 40 stories up, the streets below resembled arteries, pulsing, vital lines that connected the districts he controlled. He had brought Mila here, the one place even his closest lieutenants could not enter unbidden. She sat on his leather sofa now, feet dangling, a cup of hot chocolate cooling between her small hands. Julian watched her from across the room, cataloging each feature that linked her to Elise. To himself, "Tell me what happened to your mother," he said finally. Mila stared into her cup. "Mom said men would come one day, bad men who worked for someone important. She made me hide in the closet with a blanket over my head." Julian remained perfectly still. "When was this?" "I was 4. Mila's voice remained steady, reciting facts that no child should possess. "They asked Mom questions about you, about something she took. She told them she didn't have it anymore." "What did they do then?" Julian's voice was soft, careful. "They hurt her. For a long time." The child's face remained unnervingly blank. "When they left, she was still breathing. She told Aunt Sarah to take me away. She said, 'Tell Julian when she's 7. Not before. They'll be watching.'" Julian absorbed each word like a physical blow. 8 years ago, he had been told Elise died in a car accident. A tragic coincidence. He had mourned her with the detachment he had cultivated as armor, never suspecting the hands that had arranged her death might be the same ones he shook each day. He moved to his desk and accessed a private server. Files even Marco didn't know existed. Security footage, financial records, personnel movements. 8 years of data, preserved by a man who trusted no one completely. "Did your mother say who sent these men?" he asked, fingers moving across the keyboard. "She called him the strategist. She said he was the one who convinced you that you didn't need her anymore." Julian froze. Only one person had ever been called that in his organization. His screen displayed grainy footage from 8 years ago. A warehouse. 3 men entering. One was unfamiliar. The other 2 were his own security team, men who reported directly to Marco. The timestamp matched exactly 3 days before Julian received news of Elise's accident. Julian remembered Marco's words after Elise disappeared. How she would have held him back. How sentiment was weakness. How empire builders couldn't afford to be fathers. He pulled up financial records. Large cash withdrawals authorized by Marco. Shell companies created to purchase the property where Elise and her sister had lived. A systematic erasure of connections between Julian Thorne and Elise Hart. Connections Julian had never tried to hide because he hadn't known they needed hiding. "Your Aunt Sarah," Julian said, his voice now Arctic cold. "Did she say who killed her?" Mila looked up, her eyes older than her years. "She said it was the man with the scar. The one who stands behind you and smiles. Marco, always at his shoulder. Always loyal. Always smiling." The phone rang at midnight. Julian let it ring 3 times, watching it vibrate against the glass coffee table. Mila had finally fallen asleep in the guest room, exhausted by trauma and revelation. He answered on the 4th ring. "Where are you?" Marco's voice crackled through the speaker. "The Calabrese situation is deteriorating. Salvatore is making calls. We need to contain this." Julian's voice betrayed nothing. "Come to the penthouse." "Alone." A pause. "Is the girl still with you?" "Yes." Another pause, longer this time. "Is it true? What everyone's saying? That she's yours?" Julian closed his eyes. He had known Marco since they were teenagers running corners together. 15 years of absolute trust. Blood spilled together. Enemies buried together. An unbreakable bond. Or so he had believed. "Come and see for yourself," Julian replied, then ended the call. He moved silently to his study and retrieved a small case from behind a false panel. Inside lay a recorder, an old habit from negotiations that couldn't afford misunderstandings. He slipped it into his pocket, then checked on Mila once more. She slept with her hands curled into fists, fighting battles even in dreams. The elevator announced Marco's arrival 20 minutes later. Julian stood in the center of his living room, waiting. The doors opened, and Marco stepped out, his scarred face tight with concern. "You've created a significant problem," Marco said without preamble. "The Calabrese alliance was years in the making. We can still salvage it if you explain." When did you decide Elise needed to die? Julian interrupted, his voice conversational. Marco froze mid-step. For 3 seconds, Julian counted them. His lieutenant's face remained perfectly blank. Then concern returned, too deliberate, too practiced. Elise? Your old girlfriend? The car accident. Marco shook his head. That was 8 years ago. What does she have to do with today? Julian moved to his laptop and turned it to face Marco. On screen, the warehouse footage played in silent accusation. You sent Decker and Rios to find her. They tortured her for information. About me. About something she had taken. Marco's eyes flicked to the hallway where Mila slept, then back to Julian. The concern dissolved, replaced by something harder, colder, more authentic. She was a liability, Marco said finally, dropping the pretense. You were building something important. She would have ruined everything with her sentimentality. He gestured toward the hallway. With that, Julian said, each word precise as a blade, is my daughter. A weakness, Marco corrected. I did what needed doing. What you would have done yourself if you weren't blinded by her. Every empire requires sacrifice, Julian. You taught me that. The man Julian trusted most. The man who stood beside him for 15 years. If this story is giving you chills, share it right now. Someone in your life needs to hear this. We'll be right back to it. But Julian wasn't finished. Not even close. Dawn broke over the city as Julian's car sliced through empty streets. The recording of Marco's confession was now secured in 3 separate locations. Insurance, evidence, a death warrant in digital form. Dominic drove while Julian sat in the back, phone pressed to his ear. The safe house on Riverton. Take Mila there now, he instructed Vito, one of the few men still deserving his trust. No one follows you. No one knows where you're going. Not even me. The plan was imperfect, but necessary. Julian needed to confront Salvatore Calabrese personally, to end this feud before it ignited a war. Mila would be safer away from him while he did what needed doing. Across town, in Julian's penthouse, Vito helped Mila pack a small bag. The girl was silent, methodical, packing only essentials. A child who understood that possessions were temporary, safety was relative. Neither noticed the sedan parking across the street, or the man watching through high-powered binoculars. The man was Anton Keller, Victoria Calabrese's personal security. He spoke quietly into a phone. Confirmed. The girl is still here. Thorne is not. Inside the Calabrese estate, Victoria stood before her father, ice-cold fury radiating from her. The wedding gown was gone, replaced by a tailored black suit. Marco reached out, she said. He claims the girl is proof of Julian's involvement in Elena's death. Salvatore Calabrese's eyes narrowed. Elena? My Elena. Victoria nodded. Julian's secret child with another woman carries evidence that could link back to Elena's disappearance 4 years ago. The lie slid easily from her lips. Elena Calabrese, Salvatore's youngest daughter, Victoria's sister, had vanished during a botched kidnapping. Her body had never been found. The family had suspected Julian's organization, but could never prove it. Now Victoria offered her father the vengeance he had craved for years. The girl must not leave that building alive, Salvatore ordered. In the penthouse, Vito checked his watch. Time to go, little one. Mila nodded, shouldering her small backpack. They took the service elevator down to the garage level. The doors opened onto concrete and fluorescent lights. 4 men waited, guns drawn. Hand over the girl, one said. Our business isn't with you. Vito pushed Mila behind him. Run back to the elevator, he whispered. Then louder. You know who she belongs to. You know what he'll do. Thorne's on the other side of the city, the man replied. This ends before he gets back. Mila backed away as Vito's hand moved toward his weapon. The first shot cracked through the garage, then another. Vito fell. Mila ran. The garage was a maze of concrete pillars and parked cars. She ducked, weaved, made herself small, all the things Aunt Sarah had taught her. But the footsteps grew closer. 4 men, spreading out, hunting. In his car, Julian's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. We have your daughter, a voice said. You have 60 seconds to return to the penthouse garage before we finish what started 8 years ago. She had 60 seconds. He had one choice. If you need to know what happens next, you already know what to do. Like, subscribe, and do not touch that screen. This ending is worth everything. And Julian Thorne ran. Julian's car screeched to a halt outside his building's garage entrance. He abandoned it there, keys still in the ignition, the door hanging open like a broken wing. The security gate recognized his biometrics, sliding open with mechanical indifference to the urgency of the moment. The garage stretched before him, a concrete labyrinth of shadows and pillars. Blood marked the floor near the elevator. Vito's blood. Julian moved past it without pause, a ghost navigating through the underworld. He heard them before he saw them, men's voices, harsh whispers echoing between concrete walls. They were hunting systematically, closing in on something. Someone. Julian removed his suit jacket and loosened his tie. The weight of his weapon against his ribs was familiar, comforting. He had killed before, many times, but always for the Empire. For power. For territory. Never for this. A child's strangled gasp echoed from the far corner. Julian moved toward it, his footsteps silent from decades of practice. He rounded a concrete pillar and saw them. 3 men surrounding a parked SUV. Behind the vehicle's tire, barely visible, was a small foot. Mila. There's nowhere to run, little girl, one man called. Come out now, and this ends quickly. Julian recognized him. Anton Keller, Victoria's security chief. A man who had sat at Julian's table 3 days ago, discussing wedding security arrangements. Now hunting his daughter. Julian stepped from the shadows. It ends now, he agreed, but not for her. The men spun, weapons rising. Julian was faster. 2 shots, 2 bodies falling. Anton ducked behind a car, returning fire. Bullets pinged off concrete. You're making a mistake, Thorne. Anton shouted. The Calabrese's, Marco. Everyone knows what the girl represents. What she can prove. She's a threat to everything. Julian advanced, methodically, implacably. She's not a threat. She's a child. My child. She's the end of your empire. Anton's voice cracked with desperation. Julian paused, the truth of the words washing over him. Anton was right. Protecting Mila meant burning everything he'd built. The Calabrese alliance. His position. His power. 20 years of blood and calculation. All sacrificed for a child he'd met hours ago. He stepped into the open, making himself a target. Then let it end. Anton rose to take the shot. Julian fired first. When silence returned to the garage, Julian moved to the SUV. Mila cowered behind the tire, eyes wide but dry. Are you hurt? He asked, kneeling before her. She shook her head, studying his face with eyes too old for her years. You came back for me. Yes. The simplicity of the word surprised him. Mom said you would. If you knew about me. Her small hand reached for his. She said underneath everything, you were still the man she loved. Julian's phone buzzed with messages. Marco rallying loyalists. The Calabreses declaring war. His empire collapsing in real time. He ignored it all and took his daughter's hand. 2 months later, a small house stood on the coast of Maine, its weathered shingles blending into the landscape as if it had always been there. Inside, Julian Thorne sat at a kitchen table that had never known bloodshed negotiations, reviewing homework instead of territory maps. The 7 times table is still giving me trouble, Mila said, her pencil tapping against the page. Julian studied the numbers, feeling more uncertain about multiplication than he ever had about ordering executions. We'll work on it together, he said. A promise that extended beyond mathematics. The coastal town knew them as James and Mila Hart. Father and daughter starting fresh after losing her mother. A story close enough to truth to be maintained without effort. No one here recognized the man who had once controlled half a city's underworld. No one looked for Julian Thorne in this quiet father who walked his daughter to school each morning. The empire had fallen as empires do, quickly, violently, thoroughly. Julian had ensured its destruction by releasing Marco's confession alongside evidence of the Calabrese family's involvement in Elena's disappearance. The resulting war had consumed them all, leaving nothing for Julian to reclaim even if he'd wanted to. He didn't. His phone, a new number, a new life, rang rarely. Today it chimed with a message from Dominic, the only lieutenant who had chosen loyalty to Julian over loyalty to power. The last of Marco's faction fell yesterday. The message read, Salvatore Calabrese suffered a stroke during questioning. Victoria fled the country. It's finished. Julian deleted the message and looked out the window. Mila was in the yard, attempting to coax a cautious Robin closer with scattered breadcrumbs. Her patience was remarkable, a skill learned through survival, now redirected toward gentler pursuits. He had no idea how to be a father. The rules that had governed his existence for 20 years were useless here. Violence solved nothing. Intimidation achieved nothing. Power meant nothing. He was learning a new language, one of school lunches and bedtime stories and conversations that contained no threats. Sometimes at night, when the house was quiet and doubt crept in, Julian would stand in the doorway of Mila's room, watching her sleep. In those moments, he understood what Elise had always known, that there existed in him something worth salvaging, something worth protecting beyond power and control. Mila looked up and saw him watching. She smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes, becoming less rare with each passing day. She waved him over, pointing to the robin that now hopped cautiously toward her outstretched hand. Julian joined her in the yard, his steps deliberate and quiet. The robin didn't flee. He knelt beside his daughter, his hand finding hers naturally now, the gesture no longer awkward or forced. Julian Thorne walked into that wedding as a Mafia boss. He walked out as a father. And Mila Hart, a little girl with a whisper, dismantled an empire just by telling the truth. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that even the hardest people carry something soft inside them, then hit that like button, leave a comment telling us what moment hit you hardest, and subscribe, because the next story we have for you is even more powerful than this one. You don't want to miss it. This has been your story. Thank you for watching. Some empires are built with iron. Some are broken by a whisper. And some men only become who they were always meant to be, when a child looks up at them and says, I'm yours.